That's willingness and ability to persevere and be really passionate about what you're doing.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, and welcome to today's episode. On today's show we have Ray Makela. He is the CCO of the Sales Readiness Group, and today's show we're diving into grit. What sales grit actually is, how it affects your ability to close deals and just live a bigger life in general, which is, I always like to do these episodes where they cross over from sales, which is just huge success in everything that we're doing, and then how we can implement more grit into our lifestyle, into our lives, and whether we're born with it or whether it's something that we can develop. Clearly, it's something we can develop because there'd be no show otherwise. You can find out more about Ray over at salesreadinessgroup.com. And with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, Ray, and welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Well, Will, thanks. Appreciate you having me here. Excited to chat for a little bit.
You're more than welcome, sir. I'm glad to have you on. We're going to dive into a topic today, which I think has real depth, and hopefully our thoughts will co-align with this, because I've got some thoughts on the practicality of all this. But I'm going to start on a super basic level. I want you to tell us what grit is, then we'll narrow it down to what that means for salespeople, and then hopefully we'll end the show with how we can implement it. So let me ask you this, Ray. Super basic question. What is grit for those of us who aren't aware of it?
Yeah, and I think it is a great place to start. You can think about grit at the highest level. We all have an idea, right? It's kind of digging in, it's kind of doing that extra little bit. But in fact, the way I got turned on to this and excited about it was through a book and actually a TED Talk by a researcher named Angela Duckworth. And Dr. Duckworth defines grit as passion and perseverance towards long-term goals. And I thought that was really a great way of characterizing. It's not one or the other. It's not just being passionate, because there are a lot of passionate people that don't put the work in. And it's also not just working super hard, because that can just be drudgery. But it's really the combination of the two that she defines as grit, and then looks at it as a predictor of success in a number of different groups, which we'll talk about. But for me, that's really what it boils down to, is that's willingness and ability to persevere and be really passionate about what you're doing.
And how does, and again, I want to immediately because there's so much to go at here, I want to immediately translate this into sales. Is this as simple as, and I'm sure it's not, is it as simple as being passionate about the product you're selling and then being relentless with how the quantity and the frequency and the cadence of how you get in front of potential customers and pitch to them?
I think that is at the highest level. It's really getting excited, getting enthusiastic. They say sales is about the transfer of confidence. And unless we're really confident and really excited about our products, how do we expect our customers to get excited about it? So I think it really is understanding how we are the best solution for that customer's particular problem. And if we can't answer that question, we better work harder to figure that out. And also understand why our products are the best, or our solutions are the best in the industry. And again, figuring out those different angles, those different perspectives, how they map to those requirements, so that we can be differentiated as opposed to a commodity. So I think that's the passionate part. And then persevering, it comes up in a lot of different ways in terms of digging in and going to that extra effort, taking those extra steps that are necessary. And, when I first stumbled across this, it really resonated, because I think back over my career, both in sales and sales management, of those people who really knocked it out of the park were the ones that just hustled, just did the extra effort, just put in those bits, said, we're going to win this. How are we going to do this? Let's figure it out, and then let's do what's necessary. And when Angela Duckworth actually researched, and what's interesting in the kind of setup for this is she looked at a number of different groups, from inner city kids to school teachers to West Point Academy cadets, going through their first year as plebes. She looked at spelling bee contestants, all of these different groups where she tried to benchmark and look at what was making some people successful and others not. And guess what? It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't socioeconomic background. It didn't have to do, with their emotional intelligence even. It had to do with their ability to persevere and their passion towards what they were doing. And what really got my attention is she looked at salespeople, and that was one of the groups that she benchmarked, and she tried to say who's going to make their quota and actually who is going to be here at the end of the year, who's going to actually last and have retention. And those that she benchmarked, and she has a grit index that she uses, those that showed the most grit were actually the most successful in the sales organization, and that really got my attention.
Okay, so for anyone listening now who they're working in sales, they probably assume that, to use your word as you described them, they probably assume that they're hustling, that they are passionate about their product. Is there a, other than going through the grit index as a benchmark, I think you mentioned then, is there any way to know where we're starting with all of this? Is there a way to know whether we have grit or we haven't, other than, I guess, if we're hitting target or not?
Well, I think it is a mindset. And I think when we look at those opportunities and we look at our whole pipeline, when I run a sales meeting and I hear from people in the room saying, well, they didn't call me back, or that contact's gone silent, you start to hear the stories around why things aren't moving, where the gritty people are saying, here are the 3 things I'm doing. And that didn't work, so I called the person's boss, and then I called somebody else I knew, and then I actually just decided to drive over there and walk the halls, or whatever those creative things are. That's the evidence that we're looking for. I think when we start making excuses, and a lot of times if we're making excuses to ourselves, we should really listen to that voice. If we're starting to rationalize why things aren't working, then maybe that's an indicator that we need to go find a little bit more of that grit ourselves. And, I like to go after opportunities that we can win. And so I think that's another thing, is not having so much noise in the pipeline, or we talk about a bloated pipeline. There's often so much stuff in there, we don't know what's really qualified or not. We'll get that junk out of there, focus on those and say, hey, let's improve our win rate by disqualifying, getting that junk out. And then those that we say we want to win, and I love this, I had a mentor say it to me years ago, said, hey, you should only go after those deals you can't afford to lose. And treat them that way. We are going to go after this to win. Okay, what's the greedy behavior that's going to get us there, as opposed to just sometimes it feels like we're going through the motions and we're waiting for the customer to do some things, and they don't happen and we get frustrated.
Step back a second and just dive into that a little bit more, because that is an interesting one, and there's probably a whole show to go into that, of deals that you can't afford to lose. What properties make up a deal like that? Or am I coming at it from the wrong angle of it's how you think about the pipeline in general? Do you get what I'm saying with this? Like, what makes up a deal that you can't lose? What should we be aspiring to have in our pipeline so that we can look at it from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really starts with the definition or kind of idea of what a best customer looks like. So is that the industry? Is that the size? Is that the way they behave, the way they value our services? Are we going to make money on this? And are we going to be able to deliver it successfully? So I think if we don't have some type of qualification checklist, or at least idea in our mind of what a good opportunity looks like, that should be our first filter. And then we should look at it and say, can we win this? And I think earlier in my career, and I think a lot of salespeople, they never met an opportunity they didn't like. And so they'll chase everything without really saying, yes, we could do this work, but can we really win it? Are we really the best positioned? Do we have a good offering, or are we just kind of convincing ourselves? So I think that's really where it starts, is, we should have a good idea in our mind what type of business we want to go after, what great looks like, and then focus on those opportunities. And that's where it starts.
Great. So you've cleared up something here that I was going to go into later on in the show. And that is that perhaps you can have all the grit in the world, but you've got to be strategic with where you're still putting your time and attention. Otherwise, you're just going to be a mad person running around trying to close everything and burning out. So we can keep the strategic side of things to one side for the moment. That's perhaps another show that we can have in the future. But
Sure.
Going back to grit very specifically for a second, what I struggle to wrap my head around sometimes is, because I've only ever been, when I've worked in medical device sales, I've only ever been in that top 80%, kind of hitting target, but not crushing it, and not being that A player, that kind of superstar. It prompted me to put the show together to find out the traits of those superstars so I can implement them into my game. But with that in mind, and just context for yourself, how do you know when you are being persistent enough so that you're being efficient with your time versus obviously one side of that is being a complete pain in the arse and annoying everyone. And then the other side of that is, the B, C, D player where they're just making one phone call, they don't get a reply, so they move on to the next. How do we kind of judge where we should be? Because I'm assuming that's the starting point to be able to put some of this in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it is, and you hit it on the head in terms of just working harder and just more flurry of activity. Because I think we've probably all been sold to in those situations where the people just get annoying, frankly, right? They're too persistent or they're too nagging, and you're like, do you not have any other deals in your pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
or what's going on here? And I don't think that helps build rapport. I don't think that helps build the long-term relationship. Frankly, it just gets irritating after a while. So I don't think it's just more activity. I think it's the right activity. And what I would suggest is we need to be thinking about how we add value at each stage of that sales process. And so if we're trying to follow up, maybe, and we have a blog and video on this topic as well, that the contact goes silent, what do you do? How do you be professionally persistent? And I would say each time you go back, you better have something to offer, not just, hey, I'm checking in, any updates? Well, that doesn't do anything for the customer. Versus maybe starting that conversation or that email saying, I was just thinking about you the other day, and I wanted to forward you this blog article, this video, this topic I ran across that, referenced an earlier conversation we had. Or I thought this might help you as you're positioning for your internal discussions. Thinking about how can we help them, and that whole idea of the go-giver or paying it forward. Let's do those things that are going to help. And also they're going to say, wow, okay, he's not just nagging me, he's offering or she's offering me a little bit of insight. And so I think we can think about those things. Now, how can we be gritty about those types of activities that are actually going to advance the deal, as opposed to just trying to accomplish our needs, which is, I need an update for the pipeline. So, can you call me back? Well, it's not their job to call you back.
So assuming value first through the contact, whether it's, in person, voicemails even, or emails, which are more likely. Again, I just want to drill down to maybe there's data on this, and obviously it depends on specific industries, but are we gritty if we spend, if they're the right customer, we're adding value every touch, should we be emailing them 5 times and no response? Should we be emailing them 7 times? I know there's a statistic about the percentage of people that close after the 7th point of contact. That's never really been my personal experience. If you've got the right customer at the right time, and your product is solving a problem, it's never taken me 7 emails to get anyone's attention. But clearly industry specific. So what I'm trying to get at, Ray, is there a number that we can put on this of, you are a gritty salesperson, and if you persist long enough with this grit, and you send 7 emails to enough people, you'll win, you'll have success. Is there a number to put on this, or is it more dynamic than that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of the industry metrics on that, and I think they are just that. They're benchmarks, they're kind of generic, and they don't necessarily help the individual salesperson, where you're thinking about, well, no, this is a particular client with a particular situation, and your mileage may vary or the situation may vary. So I don't have a magic number or magic approach. What I would suggest is going back to, in the sales process, and we talk about this a lot in our managing the pipeline and forecasting training, about what steps do you expect the customer to take from first contact through closing the deal? What are we doing at each of those stages? And what's the expectation in terms of, okay, we're going to present this, you're going to review it, we're going to get back together, you're going to go to your steering group, now we're going to present again with a formal proposal, then it needs to go to procurement, whatever those stages are. A lot of times the salespeople throw the things over the fence, if you will, and then they get frustrated because they don't know what's happening. And so I guess my suggestion on that is, I don't know if it's 5 touches or 10 touches, but we should know exactly what the process for that customer is to go from initial contact through closing the deal. And then we should take control of that and say, well, you said next week you're having this meeting, so Thursday let's book a follow-up. Let's get that time right now. Or I'm going to send you an email Friday morning with follow-up questions, and then we're going to get together the following week. So you take the guesswork out of it, I would say. And especially, and I just gave a presentation last week on negotiating with procurement. It was kind of interesting because oftentimes it gets to that final stage and then procurement's this black hole and we leave it totally up to this other group, and we get really frustrated because it takes a lot longer and there are these mysterious decision makers that come into play, and all of a sudden our margins get squeezed and our deal gets blown up, and we get frustrated because we didn't know that was going to happen. Well, shame on us, right? That should be in those early discussions saying, well, then help me understand once it goes to procurement, who's involved, what stages, what's their charter, what are their objectives, how can we help move that along so that we can actually get a deal done to get this solution in place, because we think that that's going to be beneficial to both of us. So it's kind of a longer answer to that, but I think we really need to understand what those stages are to get the deal closed and not get frustrated when, they're not returning our phone calls.
So I think it's worth drilling down into this a little bit deeper, Ray, in that for the individual salesperson, and the answer might be ask your sales manager, ask your VP of sales. They've got the CRM data to show you this. That I appreciate that might be the answer. But for salespeople who can't do that for whatever reason, or they don't have a CRM, or they don't have the background data collection, how do they suss out the number of points in the process, the number or the cadence of communication to get through each of these points? And is there, and I don't want to do a super basic kind of 101 of the sales process. Everyone listening should understand that to a certain extent. But what I want to get at is how can we customize that as an individual salesperson who's listening so that they can then reverse engineer this grit into a process. So they're not waking up every morning and going, I've got to chase this, I've got to chase this. They know that they've got to do these 5 steps and the deal either closes or it's not the right customer.
Sure. And I do think it goes to, as you said, it may not be formally defined, but you should know for your industry, even if you're a sole proprietor or you're out there as an independent rep, you should know what those stages are that a typical deal needs to go through. And so, as you said, a lot of different sales methodologies, different stages, but it's going to be something like we have an initial appointment, we work to build rapport and understand their needs, we present our solution that aligns with those needs, we handle any objections that may be on the table, present our final proposal, and close the deal. So for us, understanding what the individual steps underneath those, and as I said earlier, what is the customer action that we're expecting? And I think that's what often gets missed is we think, well, we submitted the proposal, so we check it off, versus has the customer agreed to review the proposal by a certain date and even get back together and have a presentation or have a discussion. So if we just fling the proposal over, we have no idea what happens to it. So yeah,
and
absolutely.
Is that the difference then, Ray? Is that the difference between a sales superstar and someone who's lower down that rung of they will be persistent at getting that date and getting, because it can be a difficult question to ask sometimes, depending on what you're trying to achieve from the customer. You're asking something of them, you're being direct. Is that a difference between someone who has grit, that they will go the extra mile to confirm that date and that follow-up meeting or phone call, whatever it is, versus someone with less grit will just go, here you go, get back to me when you're ready?
Absolutely. I would say in my experience, those who are those superstars, they're breaking out and demonstrating that gritty behavior, are taking control of the situation. They're not leaving it up to chance. And so they know, okay, here are the steps that I expect to happen. I'm going to manage that. I'm going to be tenacious about that, right? I'm not going to take no for an answer of getting to that next step or getting that answer. So then you really do want that perseverance, right? You want to work really hard to say, well, no, we said that we were going to review this with the executive team. When can we schedule that? Who can I work with? Who's going to be involved? And so now we're taking control. Oftentimes, I think we give the customer way too much control in that situation or leave it up to chance. And then somebody else can get in there and steer it in a different direction. So yeah, I think the gritty salesperson is the one who's willing to roll their sleeves up and say, well, you know what, we're going to help manage that, and here's what it looks like, and here's what I'm going to do to move this forward.
Definitely. I've got an example of this, and I won't name the people involved, but I know they listen to the show, so they'll be laughing when they hear this, because hopefully it'll all be resolved and booked in the diary and everything along those lines by the time your show goes out, Ray. So I'm in discussions with a big sponsorship deal at the moment. There is two companies kind of involved in it, and we can talk about this off the air in a minute if you like. But
Sure.
there's the two big players in the world of sales. It doesn't take much to guess who they are. One kind of like is ahead in this process. There's been more communication. The other one is more likely to just say, here's the budget, no faffing. And I know the person I'm dealing with at that level just has the budget to sign everything off and everything's okay. And I've tripped up along the lines of with this other company. I didn't go high enough up the food chain with these initial conversations. And so now I wasn't in control of it. And now there's another phone call in the diary with the final decision maker. And it's a great conversation to have because they want to, the way that the phone call has been framed up from their side to me is that, okay, that sounds great. What else can we kind of bundle in with it? So it's not a negative at all, but I definitely am not in control of the sales process on this front. So I'm going to ask you, so I can take something away from this myself. So I've got this phone call. It still needs to be scheduled, but it'll be scheduled in the next couple of days. Obviously, with time differences, time zones, there's always that kind of like barrier there. So that'll be the phone call will be set up. But how can I get back in control of this sales conversation? Now that I am dealing with the actual decision maker, is there any steps I need to put into place? Is there anything that I need to do very specifically to, again, to use your words, to take control of this when at the moment I feel like it's going to happen, but I've no idea when or where. The right company to work with, I'm offering them crazy value, and they know this, and they'll be smiling as they listen to this episode. They'll be smiling, knowing what I'm offering them. But I don't feel like I'm in control of this whatsoever. What do I need to do to get back in control?
Sure. Well, no, and I think it's great that it's to that next stage, and it's a good example. What can we do in that case where it seems like, we're not exactly clear? You've got a good step in terms of the meeting, but, what's going to happen there? One question I'd ask, and that we're big proponents of, is leveraging inside, whether it's coaches or advocates or champions, people call them by different names. Well, I'll just refer to them as a customer coach. So if you have somebody at that lower level who's a friendly there, and typically that's somebody that you built good rapport with, and as we often talk about, we've done things for them. We've really paid it forward. We've developed that, kind of that type of relationship that we can call them. I would want to leverage them and say, okay, here's what's happening. How can I be best prepared? What are the objectives, or what are the hot buttons for that particular person? What else can we do? So you're kind of priming the pump, right? And you're doing everything you can to be best prepared. So you're not leaving it up to chance of, oh, that person has a completely different agenda, or they had a different idea of even what the meeting was. So, that type of research, that type of tenacity, it does go back to grit, right? Of what can we do to be best prepared, researching the meeting, having the call objective, understanding who all the players are, using our network to gather as much information as we can. Now, when we walk in there, wow, we're in control and much more confident, as opposed to, oh, we're meeting with this senior person, I hope it goes well. And not saying you would do that, but I think those are the extremes, right?
Well, you've nailed this. So I've got really good relationships on the ground floor with this company because they're always writing about my content, and I've done kind of like I've given them extra videos, and I've given them behind the scenes content to put into their blog. So there's on the lower level, and obviously this is a sponsorship of content. So at the lower level of the writer level, I've got pretty good relationships, and they all listen to the show and they all enjoy it. So there is that there. And again, super practical, because I'll implement this and I'll report back on the blog as well of how well it works. What should that email be asking for? And obviously I can give some my own thoughts and insights as well, but to get it from the horse's mouth, what specifically should I be asking for and preparing for? And playing devil's advocate, what should I be asking for that isn't going to kind of like filter back up to that senior executive that I'm trying to, I don't want to look like I'm going kind of like around them, or I don't want to look like I'm trying to take the back door to, get one up on them, because it's, I want to be, super positive and super open about the communication. So what should I be asking for from these advocates and these customer coaches that I've got within the organization?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that is always a concern, right? Is we don't want either that to seem negative, or as you said, like we're doing an end around. I think we do, and I would put it straight as face value in terms of, I'm trying to be as prepared as possible for this meeting. I value this relationship. I value this person's time. I want to do everything I can to be prepared. Can you help me understand more what's going on in the organization? Are there any initiatives that this ties to or this supports, right? What are the biggest things that are keeping, this executive up at night? And that's kind of trite, but I think you get the idea. What are their biggest priorities so that when I'm speaking, I can make that connection between what they're trying to accomplish with their organization and from a strategic level to what I'm offering, which has unique value, and here's why. So I would just put it in that sense. I'm trying to be more prepared. And what's really interesting about this is coaches oftentimes just love to help, right? People love to, oh, you're asking me for my input or you're asking me for advice. Oftentimes, boy, they'll be really forthcoming. And if possible, I do that, in person or over the phone as opposed to an email.
Yep.
Certainly you can follow it up that way, but having that conversation and say, well, that's fine. Can you just give me a little bit more context? Or, sometimes you'll even hear, well, I shouldn't be telling you this, but then they give you the whole backstory and you're like, fine, I won't use that. But boy, that's helpful when you go into that room to know what's going on.
Definitely. Something you touched on then, I don't want to gloss over this because this is sales brilliance. This is why I love doing the show. And this is why I love being a salesperson myself, asking these questions really directly, because it's very difficult if there's two experts on the line or on the podcast going back and forth. I think some of these things get missed. But something you mentioned then, which I think is super powerful, super useful for me, and I'm going to leverage this in this email to set up a phone call with my customer or internal success coach. And that is, if there's any internal initiatives that's on the mind of that VP at the moment, because that is something that, unless you're internal, you probably don't have, no matter how much research you do externally, but it's probably only internally that someone can tell you that. And it seems with this company in particular that they have a push for outside content, for a whole host of, it seems like they've got a whole bunch of initiatives that I've kind of touched on and glimpsed at, but I've not really wrapped my head around because I've not managed to have that conversation. So just that on its own is a really powerful piece of information to be able to leverage into adding value in that phone call, right?
Absolutely. And, when we talk about selling at multi-levels in the organization, and the higher you go up, right, in the organization, typically they're less price sensitive. They don't care about features or in, this case, content or whatever that may be. They're more concerned about how is this going to help me with my strategic initiatives and, from an executive level. So the better you can make that connection, the more they'll say, wow, this person not only did their homework, but they understand us, they get us, they can work with us, and this provides real value. So, take price away off the table. This provides value for what we're trying to accomplish. And now that's a much different type of sale than, oftentimes when we get commoditized and they want to put us on a spreadsheet and say, okay, we're comparing you to this inferior competition, but you're more expensive, so you have to meet the price. I don't like to play in that case or in that situation.
No, not at all. It's quite funny. I said this when I spoke to, again, I'm trying not to name names or positions and all this kind of stuff because the deal isn't done yet. There's obviously,
right.
there's a way to go before it is. But dealing with kind of like that level down, it was interesting to me that even at that level, there was no even talk about price. It was the value, it was the content, it was the context, and it was the reach that the person, that organization wanted to discuss. Which means I probably should have charged twice as much. That's probably the conclusion of that. But it was interesting that, as you mentioned, then the price goes totally off the table, and then obviously that next level up, it's how you can impact the company or the marketing as opposed to like what's in it for them from a product or features benefit perspective. And so we've talked about in the context of grit, we talk about perseverance. We've not really talked about passion, but we've talked about that recently on the show before. So I'm happy to just gloss over that, even though clearly it's important. The other thing in this formula of grit is having or putting both of those towards a long-term goal. So I'm going to ask you a super open-ended question, Ray. What is, for a B2B sales professional listening to this now, what is long-term? How many months, years, or decades is that?
Yeah, that is a great question, especially as the salesperson kind of thinking, okay, what do I have control over? What is this? How does this really boil down for me? I would look at it two ways. I think there's your targets, if you will. So it's it's passion and perseverance towards hitting your targets, because that's what's going to pay for your mortgage, or whatever that is. You're trying to increase your own economic situation. So what does that look like for the year? And I always say, and starting from the prospecting funnel, how many calls do I need to make to identify how many opportunities, to produce so many proposals at what win rate to close X amount of business? And I better have an idea of what my own batting average is and how I get there, because that's my long-term goal, or that's my, call it near-term goal, midterm, of what am I trying to accomplish by the end of the year? Am I going to hit my number? Am I going to get my bonus? I think the bigger picture is, where do I want to be from a career-wise, 2, 3, 5 years from now? And so hitting that number, but also growing my selling skills, understanding the marketplace, the industry, doing that additional hour of reading a day to increase my personal awareness, my own skills, being curious about what's going on. I think we need to think about that, because those that are going to excel are the ones that are investing in themselves and are spending that additional time trying to hone the craft, if you will, and become professional salespeople. And the better they do that, and there's a ton of research that proves this out, the better you perfect those selling skills, the better the performance improves. And just like professional athletes go to the batting cage or the driving range or the hockey rink or whatever that is and practice those fundamentals every day, are we doing those things? And I think that's part of the perseverance of making a commitment to improve those skills day in and day out. And that's going to result in career advancement, larger deals, more strategic opportunities, whether that's moving up into sales leadership positions or elsewhere in the organization. That pays dividends down the line.
So when we get beyond this conversation of hitting target, which clearly is is important if we want to pay our mortgages and have our nice cars, etc. Once we get beyond that conversation, do you put much value in taking a look at, say, the 3 to 5 year picture? And do you put much kind of like value and thought, or do you think we should put much value and thought as a B2B sales professional into our personal brand, how we are perceived in the industry, and niching down very specifically, whether it be my background is medical device sales, so I'm talking about specifically my area and the surgeons on that area. Should we be having kind of one eye on the target and hitting it, because clearly we're going to get sacked otherwise, and then the other eye on this 3-5 year hustle to become I hate to use this phrase, but it's kind of the best way I can describe it, of this like mini celebrity or this mini expert in our niche? Is it worth committing to that, or is that a step too far?
Well, I mean, I think it does go to the personal goals, what you're trying to accomplish. What I will say is, if the goal is to become more influential and more successful in your industry, in your role, then that is the route. That is one particular route to get there, which is become that industry expert where, and whether it's insight selling or being the consultative salesperson, you're able to speak at that level with your customer, and you're actually able to bring insights to the table that they wouldn't have had. And that's only going to come from, making that commitment to dig in and read the industry literature and stay up on what's going on. And as you said, develop your personal brand, whether that's your own blogging or at least, publishing great articles on LinkedIn and linking to articles on LinkedIn and other media outlets. Because that will increase your influence. And also, what I've seen is those that are the most successful strategic salespeople are, they might as well be running those businesses. They understand it that well, and they just love selling, and they love going after those deals. But, their influence has increased exponentially because now they're seen as somebody that they can turn to, not just to sell them something, but for advice, for consultation, for their insights.
And is the payoff worth that? Because obviously it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. The audience listening to this show will be skewed because they are obviously proactively searching out a sales podcast and downloading it and consuming it and listening and putting it into practice. So my audience and Sales Nation is probably skewed more towards the people who would kind of double down on this long-term goal. But is the payoff big enough that it's worth putting all this effort in? Or can we have kind of like a little, can we hit target by not doing all this extra work and then just go on year on year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, can you hit target? Yeah, likely. I mean, you can just hustle and do the work and go through the motions, if you will. I think if you want to be truly influential, and also, you look at the top salespeople, and oftentimes they're outproducing others by 2 to 3 times, kind of what the average is, and they're doing that exceptionally. It's like, how does that happen? Well, it's because they have those relationships, they have those strategic insights, and so from that perspective, absolutely. I think the individual question is, well, how do I apply that? You don't want to spend 4 hours a day. You're reading, you're writing, you're developing that, but you're not applying. You still need to get it in front of people that value it. So that comes with, okay, am I able to bring those insights to my customers, testing it out, kind of reframing and improving. I don't think there's a one size fits all there, but I think the more that you can be an expert in your field, the more it will pay dividends down the line.
Nice. I totally agree. I'm glad you said that, because I'm really focused on getting the audience to think longer term, like beyond the next kind of like bonus, beyond the next sales target, because it's my belief, and it's been my experience with doing the show and selling all the sponsorship, ad space, and everything that goes along with it, and medical device sales as well, but no, very specifically the show. It becomes easier to sell to people when they know who you are before you pick up the phone, when you're getting referrals, when all these things come in. And I think if you stay in your sales role and you're really pushing and you're really adding value, and you're not screwing anyone over, and you're thinking long term for all your relationships, I just think sales becomes so much easier after that 2 or 3 year period in the trenches.
Absolutely. And I think it is a network. I think you connect to the right people. I think they start, referring business, or they start inviting you to comment or to contribute. So you're right. It just becomes exponential at that point, building out the brand and the network that supports it.
Definitely. Well, Ray, I've got a couple of questions, mate, to ask everyone that comes on the show before you tell us a little bit more about where we can find out about you. And so we'll jump straight with these. And the first one is, what is one book or resource that you'd recommend to the Salesman podcast audience?
If I could, I'll have two answers, because the first one is top of mind. We published the High Impact Sales Manager last year from Sales Readiness Group. I think it's a great practical guide for the frontline sales manager. Obviously, I'm very partial, and I'll admit that, but I've got to put a plug in, and also I think it is a very handy, very practical reference for what the frontline sales manager needs to do, from hiring, managing, coaching, leading, and motivating their team. So I'll say enough about that. The other one, and I referred to it a couple of times in this podcast, was the Go Giver. And I think that concept of paying it forward, of contributing value first into the network, I think it's a great concept. I think it's a fun read. It's a great book, just from a readability. And I think the concept pays dividends of, we're going to do these things not because we expect a immediate quid pro quo, but because by doing that, we increase the value we provide into the network, and ultimately we'll get returns from that. So, I guess those are two suggestions I'd have.
For sure. We'll link to both of them in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. We've interviewed Bob on the show before, so I'll link to his episode as well. And Ray, I've got one final question for you, mate. Something to ask everyone that comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and does make you think a little bit. I guess, and especially when I think back to my earliest time, and the first time you have a quota or you're in front of clients, I guess it'd be pretty simple. I would say, shut up and listen. and I would say that to kind of any junior salespeople as you're going out there. People don't want to hear about your products. They don't want to hear you pitch. They want to hear how you can solve their problems. And unless you're letting them do the majority of the talking, you're going to miss that. So we really focus a lot on active listening and building rapport. And, how do we lean in and really understand and care? And I think this does speak to the passion, right? We have to be passionate about our customers' problems. And so, being able to bite our tongue and let the customer speak and finish their thoughts and give them time to think sometimes, even having that pregnant pause or that silence in there, that's okay. And then really making sure we understand the underlying message that they're trying to give, because that's the nugget, right? That's the value that we can solve, that we can actually present a unique solution to, and they'll go, wow, these guys are different. They actually listen. So I guess in a nutshell, that would be it. Shut up and listen more.
And we'll wrap up with this, but how did you learn that? Or, everyone knows this in sales, that we should be asking great questions, allowing the prospect, the customer, to suss things out on their own, and obviously we're framing it in a perspective that if we feel our product can help them, great, it's win for everyone. How did you understand or intellectualize or put into practice this idea that we should be speaking less, rather than the stereotype of the used car salesperson who's shoving the pitch down people's throats? Was it a moment? Was it a sales call? Or was it kind of like a gradual realization over time?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it was a bit more the school of hard knocks of realizing that when I did a better job asking questions and listening, I had so much more great insights when it came to developing the presentation or the proposal. They're like, wow, I've actually got this. And I was fortunate to have some great mentors and some great training along the way. I think that helped with that. But yeah, I think it was one of those things that was formed over time. And I realized that the more you can engage and get the customer speaking, the more successful I was in those opportunities, the win rates going up and the size of the opportunities, et cetera. So yeah, I don't think there was one pivotal moment, but I will say just being aware of it. And that's why even in our fundamental selling skills workshops, we focus on active listening. We have exercises where we have people go through those, and they think it's a little hokey at first, and then they come away going, well, that was pretty profound. I'm going to go home and try that. Or, I'm going to try that with my client tomorrow, and think, what if you just listened and asked those great questions and really listened with an intent to understand, as opposed to listening with an intent to respond with something that sounds really smart. And so I think just being more aware of it, in my mind, was one of those things that made a difference, that yes, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to pay attention and apply some of these active listening techniques.
Definitely. Well, you kind of teased it then, but tell us a little bit more about the Sales Readiness Group, and then where we can find out more about you personally as well, Ray.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. A great place to kind of wrap up. So Sales Readiness Group, we are a sales and sales management training firm. Our key focus and really our mission in life is improving the performance of sales teams. And so when we think about why do you do sales training, why are we focusing on selling skills or negotiation or value selling or sales management, it's about improving that performance of the team. And if we can't get our head around that and can't measure and respond to that, then oftentimes we ask, well, why are you doing training? So that's really kind of how we go to market, what we think about it. You can find us on the web at salesreadinessgroup.com. We also have a blog there that you can subscribe to, both video and written blog articles, and a number of white papers and other resources there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Ray Makela, Sales Readiness Group, Makela. Twitter is Ray A. Makela as well. So I think that's most of the ways to get me. Certainly, if there are any other questions, they can hit us through the website or through LinkedIn.
Good stuff. Well, I will link to all that in the show notes for this episode over at Salesman. Oh no, I've changed the URL recently, so I'm having to. Every time I mention it, I'm hesitating. The new webpage, everyone, is salesmanpodcast.com. So the show notes will be there, salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Ray, thank you for helping me personally. And as I said, I'll report back on to you and to the audience as well as to how this deal goes down and how kind of going bottom up, getting some insights and then talking to that VP kind of changes the conversation. I think that'll be an interesting thing to report back on through a blog post or something on those lines. So I appreciate you for that insight, mate. And I appreciate for the insights on grit, kind of drilling down to this concept that the basics, the fundamentals are what really moves the needle in sales. I appreciate that. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciated your questions, your comments, your insights, and hopefully an opportunity to maybe move a deal forward. So I will definitely look forward to hearing how that turns out either way. So again, it's really been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.